The rain fell in a steady rhythm, drumming softly against the roof of Isla's small study. She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the misty horizon where the dense forest of the beastkin territory stretched endlessly. Despite the tranquil setting, her heart raced with unease. The sudden, urgent summons from Kale, the beastkin alpha, had disrupted her routine. Though their interactions were professional, there was something about his commanding presence that unsettled her. A knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. Before she could respond, the heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing Kale. His towering frame filled the doorway, his amber eyes sharp and intense. He wore a dark cloak that only accentuated the broadness of his shoulders, and his wolf-like ears twitched slightly as if attuned to every sound in the room. Isla, he said, his deep voice tinged with impatience. We don't have time to waste. She straightened, forcing her heartbeat to steady. You could have waited for me to answer. Kale stepped inside without acknowledgement, his gaze flicking briefly to the scattered notes on her desk before returning to her. There's something you need to see, he said, pulling a small, intricately carved object from beneath his cloak. It gleamed faintly in the dim light. Isla's breath caught. Is that? She moved closer, her curiosity piqued despite her wariness. The artifact was no larger than her palm, but its surface was etched with symbols she recognized from her studies, ancient markings tied to fertility rites. It's human in origin, Kale confirmed, found during a raid on a forgotten settlement. But it reacts to my kind as well. I need you to figure out why. He extended it toward her, and as her fingers brushed against the smooth surface, a sudden warmth pulsed between them. Isla gasped, pulling her hand back instinctively, but the artifact clung to her energy, a faint glow emanating from the symbols. Kale's eyes narrowed. It's stronger when you touch it. She shook her head, still reeling from the sensation. It's not just reacting to me. It's reacting to both of us. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. Whatever this artifact was, it required their combined presence to function. Kale's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Then we'll need to work together. You'll come to my quarters. Isla hesitated, her instinct screaming to refuse. But she knew Kale well enough to recognize that his mind was set. Fine, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But this is strictly professional. Kale's lips curved slightly, though whether it was amusement or something else, she couldn't tell. Of course. The walk to Kale's quarters was silent, save for the muffled sounds of the rain. His home, a sturdy stone structure near the edge of the village, was sparsely decorated but exuded a quiet strength, much like the man himself. He led her to a central room where a low table had been cleared, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the space. Kale placed the artifact in the center of the table. We'll start now. Isla took a seat opposite him, her eyes never leaving the artifact. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching the symbols, her hand steady despite the tension in the air. Kale watched her intently, his gaze almost palpable. Tell me, he said after a long silence, why would humans create something that reacts to both of us? Isla paused, her pencil hovering over the page. Some ancient human cultures believed in unity with other races, she explained. They thought harmony could strengthen both sides. But fertility artifacts like this, she trailed off, frowning. They were rare, even in their time. Kale leaned forward, his arms resting on the table. The proximity made her pulse quicken, though she forced herself to focus. What do you feel when you touch it? He asked, his voice low. Isla met his gaze, her throat dry. It's warm, like it's alive. He reached out, his large hand hovering just above hers. Touch it again, he instructed. Together. She hesitated but complied, her fingers brushing the artifact as Kale's hand settled over hers. The moment their skin made contact, the glow intensified, spreading outward in gentle waves. A soft hum filled the room, and Isla felt an almost magnetic pull between them. Kale's eyes darkened, his grip firm but not forceful. It's responding to us, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His thumb brushed against her knuckles, a seemingly casual gesture that sent a spark of heat through her. Isla's breath hitched. It's attuned to our energy, she managed, though her thoughts were scattered. The artifact was revealing more than she anticipated, its effects drawing them into an unspoken intimacy. The hum grew louder, and for a moment, Isla could swear she saw faint images flickering in the artifact's glow, shadows of two figures intertwined. She pulled her hand back abruptly, breaking the connection. The light dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp. Kale's expression was unreadable, though his eyes lingered on her. Interesting, he said finally. It reacts strongest when we're close. Isla nodded, her mind racing. We'll need to run more tests, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But this artifact, it's not just about fertility. It's trying to connect us on a deeper level. Kale stood, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the table. Then we'll see how deep that connection goes, he said, his tone both a promise and a challenge. Isla swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she gathered her notes. She could feel Kale's gaze on her as she stood, the tension between them almost tangible. Whatever the artifact's true purpose, she knew this was only the beginning. The following evening, Isla returned to Kale's quarters, her heart a tangled knot of anticipation and nerves. She had spent most of the day poring over her notes, trying to piece together the artifact's meaning, but the answers remained frustratingly out of reach. Now, with the knowledge that their work would demand even closer proximity, she felt the weight of unspoken tension pressing down on her. Kale greeted her at the door, his expression as unreadable as ever. He stepped aside to let her in, and she noticed that the room had been prepared for their next session. The table was cleared, save for the artifact resting at its center, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically, almost as if it anticipated their arrival. Without a word, Isla set her notebook down and took her usual seat across from Kale. His amber eyes followed her movements, a quiet intensity in his gaze that made her acutely aware of the space between them. We'll pick up where we left off, Kale said, his voice low but commanding. This time, we'll push the artifact further. Isla nodded, her fingers already itching to touch the strange object again. Despite her initial hesitation, she couldn't deny the pull it exerted on her, or the way her curiosity seemed to heighten when Kale was near. She reached out, her hand hovering just above the artifact's surface. Kale's hand followed, his larger one settling over hers with deliberate ease. The warmth of his touch spread through her like a slow-burning fire, and she found herself momentarily distracted by the feel of his skin against hers. "Ready?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. "Yes," she replied, her throat tight. Together, they pressed their hands to the artifact. The glow intensified immediately, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. The hum returned, deeper this time, resonating in their chests. Isla felt a strange, almost electric connection coursing through her, drawing her closer to Kale both physically and emotionally. As the artifact pulsed, it projected images onto the walls around them, faint, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and flow with their every movement. Isla leaned in, her focus sharpening as she tried to decipher the symbols. But the longer she stared, the more the patterns seemed to blur, becoming less about meaning and more about sensation. Kale's voice broke the silence. "It's reacting to more than just our energy," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It's responding to our emotions." Isla glanced at him, her pulse quickening. "Emotions?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "I can feel it. The more we let go, the stronger the connection becomes." She hesitated, her mind racing. The thought of lowering her guard in front of Kale, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, both terrified and intrigued her. But she knew he was right. The artifact demanded more than just physical proximity. It required a level of trust and openness she wasn't sure she was ready for. Taking a deep breath, Isla closed her eyes and let herself focus on the sensations coursing through her. The warmth of Kale's hand, the rhythmic hum of the artifact, the faint scent of pine and earth that clung to him, it all blended together, creating a heady mix that left her feeling both grounded and untethered. When she opened her eyes again, she found Kale watching her, his expression softer than before. For a moment, They simply held each other's gaze, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Good, Kale said quietly. Now, let's see how far this connection goes. Before Isla could respond, the artifact flared brighter, and the patterns on the walls began to shift again. This time, they formed clearer shapes, two figures standing close, their hands intertwined, their bodies leaning toward each other. Isla's breath caught as she realized what the artifact was showing them. It's reflecting us, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kale's grip on her hand tightened slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. It wants us to connect. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Isla felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Despite the surreal nature of their task, the artifact's influence made every touch, every glance, feel deeply personal. She could feel her resolve wavering, her logical mind struggling to keep pace with the emotions swirling inside her. Without thinking, she shifted closer, her free hand brushing against Kale's arm as she steadied herself. His eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of something primal crossing his face. Yet, he remained still, his restraint evident even as the tension between them grew. Isla, he murmured, her name a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. Yes, she replied, her voice barely more than a breath. For a moment, neither of them moved, the charged silence stretching between them. Then, slowly, Kale leaned in, his face mere inches from hers. His eyes searched hers, as if seeking permission, and Isla felt her heart pound in her chest. Before she could second guess herself, she closed the remaining distance, her lips brushing against his in a tentative kiss. The artifact responded instantly, its glow surging to fill the room with a radiant light. The hum deepened, vibrating through their very beings as the kiss deepened, their connection growing stronger with each passing second. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their faces flushed. The artifact's glow had dimmed slightly, but its hum remained, a steady reminder of the bond they had just forged. Kale's voice was rough when he finally spoke. The artifact recognizes us now, he said, his eyes locked on hers. But this is only the beginning. Isla nodded, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the moment. She knew Kale was right. Their journey with the artifact was far from over. And as much as the thought filled her with both anticipation and uncertainty, she couldn't deny the pull that drew her closer to him. The atmosphere in Kale's quarters felt different now, charged with an unspoken understanding that neither he nor Isla fully acknowledged. The artifact sat between them, its glow a steady pulse, as if waiting for them to continue the delicate dance it had orchestrated. Isla tried to focus on her notes, her pencil scratching faintly across the page, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the kiss they had shared. The warmth of Kale's lips, the way he had held her gaze afterward. It lingered in her mind, distracting and undeniable. Kale's voice broke the silence, low and steady. The artifact is quiet for now, but we can't assume it's finished testing us. Isla looked up, meeting his amber eyes. His expression was calm, but she could sense the same undercurrent of tension that she felt. What exactly do you think it's testing? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. Kale leaned forward, his arms resting on the table. It's not just about physical proximity, he said. It responds to our emotions, our willingness to connect. If we hold back, it will push us further. Isla swallowed, her gaze dropping to the artifact. Its glow seemed to dim slightly, as if in anticipation. She could feel the truth of Kale's words in the way the artifact had drawn them together, forcing them to confront feelings they might have otherwise ignored. The thought made her pulse quicken. I don't know how much more it wants from us, she admitted, but I'm not sure I'm ready for. She hesitated, searching for the right words. For whatever this is turning into. Kale reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a spark of warmth through her, grounding her in the moment. Neither of us expected this, he said, but we're in it together. You don't have to face it alone. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. Isla nodded, her fingers curling slightly as she drew strength from his presence. Okay, she said. Let's keep going. Kale gave a slight nod, then stood and moved to adjust the lamp, casting a warmer light over the room. He returned to his seat, his movements deliberate and calm, as if he were trying to set her at ease. Isla appreciated the effort, even as the air between them grew heavier with anticipation. This time, when they placed their hands on the artifact, the response was immediate. The glow flared brighter than before, enveloping their hands in a golden light. Isla felt the familiar hum resonate through her, but it was stronger now, more insistent. The patterns on the walls shifted again, swirling faster until they formed a single, cohesive image. Two figures standing side by side, their hands entwined, their bodies outlined in the same radiant glow. Isla's breath hitched as the image flickered, shifting to show the figures moving closer, their forms merging in a symbolic embrace. The intimacy of the scene made her cheeks flush, and she could feel Kale's gaze on her, steady and unwavering. "The artifact is guiding us," Kale said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wants us to bridge the gap between our worlds." Isla nodded, her throat dry. She could feel the weight of the artifact's expectations pressing down on her, but she also felt a growing determination to see this through. Slowly, she turned her hand beneath Kale's, their fingers interlocking as the light around them grew warmer, more encompassing. The artifact's hum deepened, and Isla felt a surge of energy flow between them, a connection that went beyond words. Her eyes met Kale's, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was only the two of them, bound together by a force neither fully understood but couldn't deny. Kale's free hand moved to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle yet deliberate. "Isla," he murmured, his voice carrying an edge of vulnerability that she had never heard before. "Whatever happens, know that I trust you." The admission caught her off guard, and her heart swelled in response. "I trust you too," she said, her voice barely audible. The artifact pulsed again, its light intensifying until it filled the room with a golden radiance. The patterns on the walls shifted once more, forming intricate designs that seemed to tell a story of unity, of trust, of two souls finding strength in each other. Isla felt a deep warmth spread through her, a sense of belonging that she hadn't realized she craved. As the glow began to fade, leaving only the soft hum of the artifact, Isla and Kale remained where they were, their hands still intertwined. The silence that followed was comfortable, almost reverent, as if the artifact itself was granting them a moment of respite. Finally, Kale spoke, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "We've passed one test, but there's more to come." Isla nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "Whatever it takes," she said, "we'll face it together." Kale's lips curved into a small, rare smile, and for the first time, Isla felt a sense of hope. Despite the challenges ahead, she knew she wasn't alone. Together, they would uncover the artifact's secrets, and perhaps, in the process, discover something even more profound. The days following their last session brought a new rhythm to Isla's life, one filled with quiet anticipation and an undercurrent of tension that was impossible to ignore. Each evening, she and Kale met in his quarters, the artifact at the center of their shared focus. It had become a silent mediator between them, drawing them into its mysteries while pushing them toward an intimacy neither had anticipated. Tonight was no different. The rain had returned, a gentle patter against the stone walls that added a rhythmic backdrop to their work. Isla entered Kale's room to find him already seated, his posture relaxed yet alert. He greeted her with a small nod, his gaze softening as it met hers. "We've made progress," he said, gesturing to the artifact, "but it's still holding back." Isla took her seat across from him, her eyes falling on the artifact's familiar glow. "Do you think it's waiting for something?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Kale leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "It's testing the limits of our connection," he said. "We've shown it trust and cooperation, but it wants more." Isla's pulse quickened at his words. She could feel the truth in them, the way the artifact seemed to feed on their emotions, drawing strength from their growing bond. It was both exhilarating and daunting, knowing that their path forward would require even greater vulnerability. As if sensing their readiness, The artifact pulsed softly, its glow shifting to a deeper, more intense hue. Isla hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand on its surface. Kale followed suit, his fingers brushing against hers as he did so. The warmth of his touch sent a familiar spark through her, grounding her in the moment. The hum returned, steady and insistent, and the patterns on the walls began to shift once more. This time, they formed intricate designs that seemed to ripple and flow with the rhythm of their joined energy. Isla watched in fascination as the images began to take shape, revealing scenes of unity and harmony between human and beastkin. But the artifact wasn't content to simply show them the past. It pushed further, its light intensifying as it projected new visions, scenes that depicted not just unity, but something far deeper. Isla felt her breath catch as the figures on the walls moved closer, their gestures filled with a tender intimacy that mirrored the unspoken tension between her and Kale. Kale's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady. "It's asking us to let go," he said, his gaze fixed on the glowing patterns. "To trust in the connection we've built." Isla nodded, her throat tight. She could feel the weight of his words, the challenge the artifact was presenting them. It wasn't just about working together. It was about opening themselves fully, without hesitation or fear. Taking a deep breath, Isla allowed herself to relax, her hand settling more firmly against the artifact. She felt Kale's fingers tighten slightly over hers, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. The warmth between them grew, the energy of the artifact flowing more freely as they surrendered to its guidance. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the glow of the artifact and the steady rhythm of their shared breath. Isla felt a profound sense of connection, as if the barriers between her and Kale were dissolving. His presence was a steady anchor, his strength and resolve blending seamlessly with her own. As the artifact pulsed again, its light shifted, casting a warm, golden hue over them. Isla felt a gentle pull, drawing her closer to Kale. She hesitated for only a moment before leaning in, her movements guided by an unspoken understanding. Kale mirrored her, his free hand lifting to brush against her cheek. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, slowly, their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and charged with the weight of everything they had shared. The artifact responded instantly, its glow surging to envelop them in a cocoon of light. The kiss deepened, a silent affirmation of the trust and connection that had grown between them. Isla felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the artifact, but from Kale's touch, his presence grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. It was a moment of pure, unguarded emotion, and she found herself surrendering to it completely. When they finally pulled apart, the artifact's glow had softened, its hum fading into a gentle resonance. Isla opened her eyes to find Kale watching her, his expression filled with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "We're closer now," he said, his voice low. "But the artifact still has more to show us." Isla nodded, her hand still resting against the artifact. She could feel its energy, a steady pulse that mirrored the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Whatever lay ahead, she knew they would face it together. Kale released her hand, his touch lingering for a moment before he stood. He moved to the window, his gaze fixed on the rain-soaked landscape beyond. "The council is growing restless," he said after a moment. "They're watching us more closely now." Isla frowned, the weight of his words settling over her. "Do they know about the artifact?" Kale shook his head. "Not yet, but they sense that something is happening." He turned back to her, his expression serious. "We need to be careful. If they see our work as a threat, they'll try to stop us." Isla felt a surge of determination. "Then we'll have to stay one step ahead," she said. "We can't let them interfere." Kale's lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Agreed." The artifact pulsed softly, as if in agreement, its light casting a gentle glow over the room. Isla knew their journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt a sense of clarity. Together, she and Kale would uncover the artifact's secrets and face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following night, The air in Kale's quarters was charged with an almost tangible energy. Isla entered, her steps purposeful yet hesitant, her mind still reeling from the artifact's revelations and the deepening connection she shared with Kale. He stood by the window, his broad frame silhouetted against the pale light of the moons, his amber eyes reflecting the distant glow. The quiet strength of his presence grounded her, even as the weight of their task loomed larger than ever. Kale turned as she approached, his expression calm but serious. "It's time," he said, his voice low. "The artifact won't wait any longer." Isla nodded, her resolve hardening. She had felt the artifact's growing urgency during their last session, its demand for unity becoming impossible to ignore. Together, they moved to the low table where the artifact rested, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. They sat across from each other, their movements synchronized in a way that felt almost natural now. Kale reached out first, his hand hovering over the artifact before settling on its surface. Isla followed, her fingers brushing against his as she placed her hand beside his. The warmth between them flared instantly, the artifact's light intensifying in response. The hum returned, deeper and more resonant than before, vibrating through their bodies with a sense of purpose. Isla felt a familiar pull, drawing her closer to Kale, but this time there was something different, a sense of inevitability, as if the artifact was guiding them toward a pivotal moment. The patterns on the walls began to shift again, more intricate and fluid than ever. Isla watched in fascination as the images unfolded, revealing a story that felt both ancient and deeply personal. The figures from before reappeared, their movements synchronized, their gestures filled with a quiet intimacy that spoke of trust and unity. As the images grew clearer, Isla felt a surge of emotion, a deep connection to the figures and their journey. She glanced at Kale, whose gaze remained fixed on the patterns, his expression unreadable. Yet, she could sense the tension in him, the weight of his thoughts pressing against the calm facade he projected. "We're close to understanding," Kale murmured, his voice breaking the silence. "But the artifact won't reveal its full purpose until we give it what it needs." Isla's pulse quickened at his words. She knew what he meant, though the thought of surrendering fully to the artifact's demands filled her with both anticipation and uncertainty. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, her focus returning to the task at hand. As if responding to her determination, the artifact's glow shifted, its light enveloping them in a cocoon of warmth. The hum deepened, resonating in their very cores, and Isla felt a sudden, intense pull toward Kale. Her hand moved instinctively, her fingers intertwining with his as the energy between them surged. Kale met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of resolve and something softer, more vulnerable. "Isla," he said, his voice low but steady, "we can't hold back now." She nodded, her throat tight. "I know." Slowly, Kale reached out with his free hand, his fingers brushing against her cheek in a gesture that was both tender and deliberate. Isla leaned into his touch, her heart racing as the warmth of his skin seeped into hers. The artifact pulsed in time with their shared energy, its light casting a golden glow over them. The moment stretched, the world outside fading into insignificance as they surrendered to the connection between them. Kale leaned in, his movements unhurried, and Isla met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and charged with unspoken emotion. The artifact flared brightly, its energy enveloping them in a wave of warmth and light. As the kiss deepened, Isla felt a profound sense of unity, a connection that went beyond words or physical proximity. It was as if the artifact was weaving their souls together, binding them in a way that was both exhilarating and humbling. When they finally pulled apart, the glow around them had softened, the hum fading to a gentle resonance. Kale's hand remained on her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. "We're closer now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the artifact isn't finished." Isla nodded, her heart still racing. She could feel the artifact's energy, a steady pulse that mirrored the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was a reminder that their journey was far from over, but there were still truths to uncover and challenges to face. The patterns on the walls shifted once more, their movements slower and more deliberate. This time, the figures were surrounded by a glowing aura, their forms blending together in a way that symbolized complete unity. Isla watched in awe as the images seemed to come alive, their story unfolding in a dance of light and shadow. Kale's voice drew her attention back to him. "The artifact is showing us what we can achieve," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It's a vision of what our connection can become." Isla's gaze softened, her resolve strengthening. "Then we'll see it through," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Whatever it takes." Kale gave a slight nod, his expression one of quiet approval. Together, they turned their focus back to the artifact, its glow a beacon of hope and possibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but Isla knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Isla and Kale continued their sessions with the artifact, each one more intense than the last. The patterns on the walls grew more intricate, their movements almost hypnotic as they seemed to draw Isla and Kale deeper into the artifact's enigmatic purpose. Yet, with every breakthrough, Isla felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing down on her. The Beastkin Council's suspicions were growing. Isla could feel it in the way the villagers avoided her gaze, in the whispered conversations that stopped as she passed. Kale had warned her that their work might attract unwanted attention, but now the threat felt more immediate, more real. One evening, as Isla prepared for another session, Kale entered the room with a quiet intensity that immediately set her on edge. His usual calm was tinged with something darker, his movements deliberate as he closed the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Isla set down her notes, her heart quickening. "What's wrong?" Kale crossed the room, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "The council is growing restless," he said. "They've noticed the changes in the artifact's energy. It's only a matter of time before they start asking questions." Isla's throat tightened. "Do they know what we're doing?" Kale shook his head. "Not yet, but they're watching us closely." He paused, his jaw tightening. "If they see our connection as a threat, they won't hesitate to intervene." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Isla knew the council wielded significant power, and their distrust of humans was well known. If they decided to interfere, it could jeopardize everything they had worked for. "We can't let them stop us," Isla said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "The artifact chose us for a reason. We have to see this through." Kale's gaze softened, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I won't let them harm you," he said quietly, "but we need to be careful." Isla nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't about to back down, not when they were so close to uncovering the artifact's secrets. Together, they moved to the table where the artifact rested, its glow steady and inviting. This time, as they placed their hands on its surface, the response was immediate. The artifact flared brightly, its hum resonating through the room with a sense of urgency. The patterns on the walls shifted rapidly, forming scenes that flickered and blurred as if the artifact was struggling to convey its message. Isla felt the energy between her and Kale's surge, stronger than ever before. Her heart raced as the warmth of his hand over hers grounded her, their connection a steady anchor in the storm of the artifact's power. The images on the walls began to stabilize, revealing a series of visions that made Isla's breath catch. She saw a great conflict, a clash between humans and beastkin that had threatened to tear their worlds apart. But amid the chaos, two figures stood united, their bond a beacon of hope that bridged the divide. Isla recognized them immediately, the same figures that had appeared in the artifact's previous visions. Kale's voice was low, almost reverent. "It's showing us the past," he said, "the beginning of the rift between our people." Isla nodded, her eyes fixed on the shifting patterns. The artifact wasn't just a relic of history, it was a guide, a tool meant to heal the wounds of the past. And she and Kale were at the center of its plan. The energy around them intensified, the light from the artifact enveloping them in a cocoon of warmth. Isla felt a pull, not just physical but emotional, drawing her closer to Kale. Her hand tightened around his as she leaned into the connection, allowing herself to be fully present in the moment. Kale's free hand moved to cup her face, his touch gentle yet firm. Isla's breath hitched as his thumb brushed against her cheek, a quiet reassurance that they were in this together. Slowly, he leaned in, their foreheads touching as the energy between them surged. The artifact pulsed in time with their shared rhythm, its light casting a golden glow over their entwined forms. Isla felt the tension in her chest ease, replaced by a profound sense of unity. The barriers between them seemed to dissolve, leaving only the raw, unfiltered connection that the artifact had been guiding them toward. As the light began to fade, the hum of the artifact softened, its energy settling into a steady, reassuring presence. Isla opened her eyes to find Kale watching her, his gaze filled with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "We're getting closer," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But the artifact isn't finished with us." Isla nodded, her heart still racing. She could feel the truth of his words in the steady pulse of the artifact beneath her hand. Whatever lay ahead, she knew it would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Kale's hand lingered on hers, his touch a silent promise of support. "We'll face whatever comes," he said. "Together." Isla's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "Together," she echoed. As they prepared for the next stage of their journey, the weight of the artifact's purpose settled over them. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but Isla knew one thing for certain. She and Kale were stronger together than they could ever be apart. The air inside Kale's quarters was heavier than usual, thick with anticipation and an edge of foreboding. Isla sat across from him at the low table, her hands resting near the artifact but not yet touching it. The faint glow of its surface pulsed steadily, like a quiet heartbeat, but tonight it felt different, expectant, as if it knew the final test was near. Kale broke the silence first, his deep voice steady, but laced with tension. "The artifact is pushing us towards something definitive. We've been following its guidance, but this next step, it will demand everything from us." Isla nodded, her fingers twitching slightly as she considered his words. Over the past days, they had faced the artifact's trials together, each one drawing them closer physically and emotionally. But this felt like a culmination, the point where their bond would either prove unbreakable or falter under the weight of its expectations. "What do you think it will ask of us?" Isla asked, her voice quiet but firm. Kale's amber eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of concern in their depths. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll have to face it without holding back." The weight of his gaze steadied her, and she drew in a deep breath. "Then let's do it." They reached for the artifact together, their hands meeting on its surface. The instant their skin made contact, the glow intensified, flooding the room with a warm, golden light. The hum that accompanied it was deeper this time, resonating in their chests and filling the air with an almost tangible energy. The patterns on the walls shifted, faster and more fluid than ever before. Isla watched as the familiar figures appeared once more, their forms outlined in light. But now, the scene was different. The figures stood before a great chasm, their hands clasped as they faced the void together. Kale's voice was low, almost a murmur. "It's showing us the final trial." Isla's heart raced as the scene unfolded. The figures stepped toward the chasm, their forms glowing brighter with each step. The message was clear. They could only bridge the gap by fully committing to their bond, trusting in the strength of their connection to guide them. The artifact's light flared, pulling Isla and Kale deeper into its energy. Isla felt the pull intensify, her senses heightening as the room seemed to fall away. All that remained was the warmth of Kale's hand in hers and the steady hum of the artifact, urging them forward. Without breaking their connection, Kale moved closer, his presence grounding her as the artifact's energy surged. His free hand reached up to cup her face, his touch gentle yet firm. Isla's breath caught as she met his gaze, the intensity in his eyes mirroring the storm of emotions within her. "Isla," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we have to trust each other completely. No hesitation." She nodded, her throat tight. I trust you. The moment stretched between them, the air thick with unspoken emotion. Slowly, Kale leaned in, their foreheads touching as the warmth of their shared energy enveloped them. Isla felt a sense of calm wash over her, a quiet certainty that together they could face whatever lay ahead. The artifact pulsed again, its light intensifying as it drew them deeper into its final trial. The patterns on the walls shifted once more, the figures now standing on the edge of the chasm, their light intertwining as they prepared to make the leap. Kale's hand moved to the back of Isla's neck, his touch both reassuring and anchoring. We're stronger together, he said, his voice steady. Let's finish this. Isla closed her eyes, letting herself fully surrender to the connection between them. The artifact's energy surged, its light growing almost blinding as it enveloped them completely. Isla felt a rush of warmth, a profound sense of unity that went beyond words or physical touch. As the light began to fade, Isla opened her eyes to find the patterns on the walls shifting once more. The figures had crossed the chasm, their forms glowing with a radiant light that symbolized their triumph. The artifact's hum softened, its glow settling into a gentle, steady rhythm. Kale's hand lingered on hers, his touch a silent acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished. We did it, he said, his voice filled with quiet relief. Isla nodded, her heart still racing. The artifact, it's at peace. The room fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of their journey settling over them. Though the artifact's trials had tested them in ways they hadn't anticipated, Isla felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had faced the challenges together, their bond growing stronger with each step. Kale leaned back slightly, his eyes soft as they met hers. This is only the beginning, he said. The council won't be able to ignore what we've achieved. Isla smiled, her resolve firm. Let them ask their questions. We'll show them the truth. Kale's lips curved into a small, approving smile. Together. As the artifact's glow continued to pulse softly, Isla felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them side by side, their bond unshakable. The room was bathed in a soft golden glow, the artifact's energy settling into a steady pulse that resonated through the walls. Isla and Kale sat in silence, their hands still resting on the artifact's surface. The intensity of the final trial had passed, leaving behind a calm that felt almost surreal. Yet, beneath the surface, Isla could feel the weight of what they had accomplished pressing down on them. Kale was the first to break the silence. The artifact recognizes our bond, he said, his voice steady but carrying a note of exhaustion. It's given us its blessing. Isla nodded, her fingers flexing slightly beneath his hand. The connection they had forged wasn't just about the artifact. It was something deeper, something that bound them together in ways she was only beginning to understand. She looked up at Kale, his amber eyes reflecting the faint light, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. We did it, she said softly. But what happens now? Kale leaned back slightly, his hand lingering on hers for a moment before he finally let go. Now we face the council. The mention of the council brought Isla's mind back to reality. The Beastkin leaders had been growing increasingly wary of the energy emanating from Kale's quarters, their distrust of humans, and their ancient artifacts, making them quick to suspect the worst. Isla knew they would demand answers, and she and Kale would need to be prepared to defend their actions. We've proven that humans and Beastkin can work together, Isla said, her voice firm despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The artifact's message is clear. If the council refuses to see that, they'll see it, Kale interrupted, his tone decisive. They won't have a choice. He rose from his seat, his presence commanding as he moved to stand near the window. The rain had stopped, and the moons cast a silvery light over the village below. Kale's gaze was distant, his expression thoughtful. They've feared this connection for generations, he continued. But fear can't hold back the truth. The artifact has chosen this moment for a reason. Isla joined him at the window, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She looked out over the quiet village, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. Despite her apprehension, She felt a growing sense of determination. They had come too far to turn back now. Kale's voice softened, drawing her attention. No matter what happens tomorrow, you won't face them alone. Isla's heart swelled at his words. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his for a moment before she reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's gaze softened, his hand moving to cover hers. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling over them. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, a quiet but unbreakable connection that had been forged through trust and perseverance. After a moment, Kale stepped back, his expression resolute. "We should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Isla nodded, though the thought of sleep felt distant. She watched as Kale moved to extinguish the lamp, the room plunging into a comfortable darkness. The glow of the artifact remained, a quiet reminder of the power they had unlocked together. As she settled onto the makeshift cot Kale had prepared for her, Isla couldn't help but replay the events of the past weeks in her mind. The trials, the connection she had forged with Kale, and the artifact's revelations, all of it had led to this moment. She knew that tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for her and Kale, but for the future of their people. Sleep came slowly, her thoughts a restless tangle of anticipation and resolve. But when morning light filtered through the window, Isla rose with a newfound sense of purpose. She and Kale would face the council together, and whatever came next, they would meet it head on. Kale was already awake, his demeanor calm and focused. He offered her a small nod as she joined him by the door, his presence steadying her nerves. Without a word, they set out toward the council chamber, the artifact carefully wrapped and carried in Kale's hands. The village was quiet as they walked, the early morning light casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Isla could feel the eyes of the villagers on them, their curiosity and unease palpable. But she kept her focus on Kale, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve. When they reached the council chamber, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. The Beastkin elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions a mix of suspicion and authority. Isla felt a brief flicker of doubt, but it was quickly extinguished as Kale stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "We've come to show you the truth," he said, his words resonating through the chamber. "The artifact has chosen us to bridge the divide between our peoples." He placed the artifact on the table before the elders, its glow soft but unmistakable. Isla watched as the council members exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly giving way to intrigue. One of the elders, an imposing figure with silver-streaked fur, leaned forward. "Explain," he demanded, his voice firm. Isla took a deep breath, stepping forward to stand beside Kale. Together, they recounted the trials they had faced, the visions the artifact had shown them, and the bond they had forged. As they spoke, the artifact seemed to respond, its glow intensifying as if to underscore their words. By the time they finished, the chamber was silent, the weight of their testimony hanging in the air. The elders exchanged quiet murmurs, their expressions shifting as they considered the implications. Finally, the elder with the silver-streaked fur spoke again, his tone measured. "You've shown us much," he said, "but this connection you speak of, it challenges everything we've held true." Kale met his gaze without flinching. "Change is never easy," he said, "but it's necessary." Isla felt a surge of pride at his words, her own resolve strengthening. Together, they had faced the artifact's trials and emerged stronger. Now, it was time to show the council that unity was possible and that the future lay in their hands. The council chamber remained silent for several tense moments after Kale's declaration. Isla could feel her pulse in her ears, the weight of the elders' scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force. The artifact sat between them on the long, carved table, its steady glow a quiet testament to the truth of their words. Finally, Elder Thelos, the silver-furred leader, rose from his seat. His sharp eyes flicked between Isla and Kale, lingering on the artifact as though trying to discern its secrets. "You have presented us with something extraordinary," he said, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. But you ask us to abandon centuries of caution and tradition. Why should we trust that this bond will not lead to ruin? Kale stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his tone calm yet commanding. Because this is the path forward. The artifact didn't choose randomly. It showed us that only through unity can our people thrive. The divide has weakened us for too long. Isla felt a surge of pride at Kale's words, but she knew this moment required more than just a strength. She took a step forward, her voice steady. We've seen what happens when fear dictates our actions. The artifact revealed a future where trust and cooperation heal the wounds of the past. We are living proof that it's possible. The council murmured among themselves, the weight of their deliberation palpable. The Los raised a hand to silence them. Words alone are not enough. The artifact's energy has indeed spread throughout the village. It has unsettled many, and they demand answers. His gaze bore into Isla. If we are to consider your proposal, you must prove that this connection is not a threat. Isla's heart raced. She glanced at Kale, who gave her a slight nod, his confidence unwavering. We're ready, she said. The Los gestured toward the artifact. Then you will complete its trial here before the council and our people. If it truly endorses this bond, we will have no choice but to accept its will. The other elders exchanged surprised looks but nodded in agreement. Isla felt a ripple of anxiety but forced herself to focus. This was what the artifact had been preparing them for. Within minutes, word spread through the village. The council chamber filled with feastkin of all ages, their eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. The artifact's glow intensified, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. Kale took his place beside Isla, his presence a steadying force. Together, they placed their hands on the artifact. The instant their skin made contact, the glow surged, filling the room with a radiant golden light. Gasps echoed from the crowd as the hum deepened, resonating in their bones. The patterns on the walls began to shift once more, but this time they were clearer, more deliberate. The figures appeared again, their forms shining with a light that symbolized unity. They stood hand in hand, their combined energy creating a bridge that spanned a vast chasm. Isla felt the energy between her and Kale grow stronger, a warmth that spread through her chest and into her limbs. The artifact was drawing on their connection, amplifying it for all to see. She closed her eyes, focusing on the bond they had built, the trust and understanding that had grown between them. The artifact responded, its light pulsing in time with their synchronized heartbeats. The patterns on the walls shifted to show a new vision, a future where humans and beastkin stood together, their lives intertwined in harmony. It was a powerful image, one that silenced even the most skeptical murmurs. Kale's voice rang out, clear and strong. This is the truth the artifact has shown us. Our bond is not a weakness. It is a strength. Together, we can forge a new path. The artifact flared brightly, and Isla felt a rush of energy, a sense of completion. The figures on the walls raised their joined hands in triumph, their light spreading outward until it encompassed the entire chamber. The hum softened, and the glow began to recede, leaving behind a profound silence. Belos stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He studied the artifact for a long moment before turning to face the gathered crowd. You have witnessed the artifact's power, he said. It has confirmed their bond and shown us a vision of what could be. He looked back at Isla and Kale, his gaze softer now. You have proven your commitment and your strength. The council will honor the artifact's will. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, a mixture of awe and tentative acceptance. Isla felt a wave of relief wash over her, her legs nearly giving out from the tension. Kale's hand on her shoulder steadied her, his quiet strength a reassuring presence. As the crowd began to disperse, Belos addressed them one last time. Let this be the beginning of a new chapter. We will work together to build the future the artifact has shown us. The villagers slowly filed out, their expressions thoughtful. Isla and Kale remained in the chamber, the weight of what they had accomplished settling over them. Belos approached them, his demeanor more relaxed. You've done something remarkable today, he said. It won't be easy, but I believe we can move forward. Kale inclined his head in acknowledgement. Thank you, Elder. We'll do everything we can to ensure this transition succeeds. The Los nodded, then turned and left, leaving Isla and Kale alone with the artifact. The glow had dimmed, its energy now a quiet, steady presence. Isla exhaled deeply, the tension finally releasing from her body. We did it, she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Kale turned to her, his expression soft. We did, he agreed. He reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek in a tender gesture. And we'll face whatever comes next together. Isla leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and hope. The challenges ahead would be many, but for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them. With Kale by her side, anything seemed possible. As the first light of dawn filtered through the chamber's high windows, Isla and Kale stood together, their bond stronger than ever. The future was theirs to shape, and they would do so hand in hand.